Welcome to this week's Women's Power Hour show. And joining me in the studio today is Sonita Gale, producer and director. Sonita, I'd like to welcome you to the Women's Power Hour show.
Thank you, Yvonne. It's so good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I feel incredibly blessed and honoured to have you on the show. We're talking about something that I think needs to be brought more into people's awareness. We know that things are happening, but lots of people don't necessarily know exactly what those things are. So we're going to be focusing on your feature-length documentary, which is called Hostile. But before we kind of get into that, it would be great for the listeners to hear a little bit about you, Sonita. Who is Sonita Gale? What's your journey and your expertise?
Okay, so I'm 47 years old. I'm a mother of two. I came into filmmaking quite late in my life. I worked in London. I came here to study actually my degree, and then I worked in the city. I had a family, children. I then didn't work for a very long time. And I decided in my 40s really to have a career change from working in recruitment and headhunting, and try to use my skills in something that I was really passionate about. And I guess I've always been passionate about storytelling and writing and creative writing. So when the children were older and I hit my 40s, I started to think about, well, what's my future? What is my contribution? I love being a mother, but I have so much more to give. And going into storytelling and creative writing was something that I was really interested in, and hence why I decided to enter into the world of film.
With that, let's just focus then on this feature-length documentary, Hostile, that you have created. Incredibly powerful. What's the kind of story behind it?
I guess Hostile is really a film about the Black and brown migrant and working class experience in our society. But specifically, this is about the hostile environment. It's really a film that brings to the forefront the issues that people are experiencing around the hostility that we have in our country, and not the hostility we have in our country currently, the hostility that we've had in our country for many decades. So really the film is about the hostile environment, which is a real thing, which is a set of policies that have been put in place by successive governments to really make life unbearable for migrants that are here or coming here, to make it so difficult for them that they either don't come, or they get deported, or they decide to leave voluntarily. So our film is really about that experience and about legislation and policy that restricts their rights. And so it covers the breadth of those topics, everything from the history of hostility to empire, to modern day policies, to then the very real realities of the participants in the film, of their day-to-day living, under this hostile environment. But then it also reflects deeply on our society and about really the commonalities that we have and how these hostile environment policies are setting us against each other. And then the film really ends on hope. If we kind of set our differences aside and focus on our similarities, then maybe that will be the start of overcoming this hostile environment that we have currently. So it's a very topical subject now, with what's been happening with policies like the Nationality and Borders Bill, the police bill, and what's happening now within the Home Office and now within the government with the recent resignation of Boris Johnson. I think everything in the film is extremely relevant right now. So I feel that it's a timely film for many reasons.
100%. And I know that you have been on the road promoting the documentary. Why did you feel compelled to make it in the very first place?
I think being a second generation British Asian with parents that were migrants, and also parents that came from sort of the legacy of empire. My parents were refugees because of the partition of India and Pakistan. My mom particularly was forced into severe hardship and displacement, moving from a house to a mud hut, walking for 16 days across borders, suffering from hunger, near death, starvation. That walk lived with her whole life. And being a daughter of a refugee, you kind of feel that pain, that intergenerational trauma that I feel that a lot of us as second generations don't really talk about and address. And I think that Hostile was my moment to address those hidden traumas that I carry, and my voice was trapped for many reasons because of the life that we led as migrants living in this country. We didn't necessarily have the opportunity to talk about these stories. My mom didn't, in the environment that she was in, being a woman who became a single parent because my father died when I was very young, and then not having the resources around her. She lived in a community where there were Sikh, Hindus and Muslims. However, she couldn't speak or write English very well. So she struggled immensely when I was growing up. I saw all of that. I witnessed all of that. So as a filmmaker, when you experience those things, you can't help but to want to uncover those things. You want to go deep and reflect on those things and bring those narratives to the forefront, showing a part of my history, my mom's history, my life, my mom's life, my family's life. And I think that was really the starting point for Hostile. That reflection happened when the pandemic happened. I became deeply reflective on my own childhood and so appreciative and, just so grateful to those people like my mum that came here post-Empire to build this country. And then I realized when the pandemic struck that those very people that came then were the very people that were keeping our society moving in 2020. And those were the people I was trying to find when making Hostile.
Wow. Oh, that already touches me very deeply, just hearing that story. And I've had the opportunity to watch the trailer and the documentary, and it's so gripping, Sonita. I mean, listening to the passion actually of the leaders who understand that the system is broken, it's not working, and then hearing the stories, so sad. I mean, just the sadness and the anger of the people that are being affected and how they're being treated. It's deeply troubling. I found it emotionally quite draining. That's how powerful it was. What sort of reactions have you had from the documentary viewers so far?
Yeah, I mean, I've had some pretty emotional reactions. I've had people weeping at screenings. I've had people just a level of disbelief that I've never seen before, not knowing that these things were happening in our society. I've had people feel ashamed about this. I've had people feel sickened by this. But I've also had people that have had this huge response for a call for action. So people that have left empowered, even though there's a significant level of disbelief, anger, upset, regret, shame, people have left feeling empowered, like, okay, what do we need to do? What can we do? How can we help the people in the film? How can we help you? How can we help this message? And really, for me, it's about the message. It's about the story. It's about the participants. It's about our future. What society do we all want? We don't want the society that we see in the film. The film was a story, a mechanism, an entity to allow us to create change. For me, I wanted to create that portal, that message, that sign, that language, so that we know that language is a gateway for an attitude. And we want to change that language by using the film. So I think really, even though we have all of this kind of negativity, this kind of disbelief, this emotion, this anger, we talk about switching that to something positive. Let's change that. So, yeah, I mean, we've had a huge response. We've had people like Jon Snow talk about our film, saying that it's an important and revealing film with critical questions and revelations about UK society in the 21st century. We've had journalists like Peter Bradshaw from The Guardian review the film and give it 4 stars. Amelia Gentleman doing a write-up about Farouk on the film. I've been to Parliament. I've had, over 80 screenings of the film. I'm now planning on going to the United Nations. I'm embedded politically, socially, and environmentally and economically to a point. I'm covering all aspects of society, trying to get this film out there at grassroots to the political level. And it's kind of, it's there, you know, we're getting into law firms, also into schools, into universities, and trying to push this narrative across all spectrums so that people broadly understand what the film's about and have their own call for action. And it's small steps, you know, we cannot achieve this alone. We cannot achieve this with just a film. We have to achieve this together with common ground. So the film is part of that language changing. And it's been amazing. I feel so grateful and thankful for the people that have taken action, grateful and thankful for people like you reaching out to me, for anyone that reaches out to me and watches the film. I'm always so grateful because we have an opportunity here, and that opportunity is happening now. And I'm so excited about this week and what's happening with the current arrangement, because it's a moment for change, and that's change we've been looking for a long time.
And I believe that you were at Glastonbury, is that right?
Absolutely. I was at Glastonbury Festival. It was my first music festival that Hostile got into, and wow, it was an incredible screening. Again, Glastonbury, you know, it speaks to this film, you know, the inclusivity, the history of Glastonbury, where it's looked upon helping charities, changing the language, whether it's been environmental or political. And this film reached to those audiences with Mark Kermode and also with John Savan from Greenpeace being on the panel and hosting. It felt so right to have this film at Glastonbury.
I love that. I feel incredibly proud of you, Sonita, because you have not just in the creation of the documentary, but that you are driving it with such force into all these different arenas, because it really is a wake-up call. It really is a moment for people to understand and realize what's going on. I always want to say behind their backs, really getting that full picture. So let's have a short break, and when we come back, I've got some more questions for you.
Thank you.
We are back on the Women's Power Hour show. I am delighted to have Sonita Gale in the studio with me, producer and director. We're talking about this amazing documentary called Hostile that she has created. It's putting out there and really getting it in front of lots of different audiences who need to see this, who need to be aware of what's going on. You've shared with us already kind of the responses you've been getting from different medias and groups. You've been at Glastonbury, which is all amazing. Now, as the Women's Power Hour show, of course, there is a particular interest with women and women's experiences. And so the question I want to ask you next is, can you describe some of the experiences of the women you have spoken to whilst doing this filming?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, one of the main participants of the film, Daksha Vasani, is a migrant herself, came over from India, and has lived and worked in our country as a carer, and, you know, various administrative jobs in schools, in education. And when the pandemic struck, she wanted to do something for her community. And as you saw in the film, she set up the Community Response Kitchen, which is a food bank. Community Response Kitchen helped people during the pandemic. So it provided, you know, 2,500 meals to the communities of Brent and surrounding areas. So really, she became a cook and a food bank during that time. People would come, take food. She'd also deliver hot foods, hot meals to individuals that were suffering from no recourse to public funds and suffering from, you know, food deprivation. So really, she was somebody that I was kind of really drawn to, I guess. She's been somebody that's just an incredible rock for her community, and having her migrant experience really propelled her into wanting to help. I think the other person in my film was Saba, which was Farouk's wife. She came here, you know, married to Farouk in Pakistan, you know, here to live with her husband. He was working in the NHS. And I think really she suffered from this hostility because she witnessed what her husband was going through and her children, and herself with all of these applications that they had to do on a daily basis, all of these limitations to their human rights. They still don't have indefinite leave to remain. They're still on limited leave to remain. They're still fighting the system. And she's come here from Pakistan. So witnessing her struggle as part of this film was something that really grabbed my attention. And I guess the anonymous lady that we have in our film was somebody that mother came here as a migrant, post-empire, worked in the NHS, worked as a teacher. And as a child, she witnessed her own mother's struggles. And even today, 2 decades on, she still does not have her indefinite leave to remain. So she's still waiting to be a permanent resident of the UK. And I guess her struggle also is displayed in our film. And, these 3 women really touched me powerfully within the film. I guess the woman that touched me the most was my mother, really, who is in the film. And I shot her interview 5 years ago because I wanted to write down exactly what my mom's experiences were. And I never realized years later and years down the line that her experience as a refugee would feature in my film. So the women in my film are just so important. And I think there is an opportunity to explore that greatly in potentially other films or series of women that have struggled because of the hostile environment. On tour, I have met women firsthand in the audiences that suffer from this level of hostility. So women who are subject to no recourse to public funds, that are trapped in relationships because of domestic abuse and violence. They might be married to a British citizen. Because of their visa restriction, they can't access healthcare, they can't access support. So they're trapped in this relationship because they know if they leave, then they're going to have no recourse to public funds. So witnessing the experiences of women on this tour has been heartbreaking for me. So, I think that the women's stories are incredibly powerful and incredibly important. And I'm so happy that in Hostile, we have 50% of the representation and more for women. Yeah.
It is so important to hear the women's stories and their experiences, and quite devastating, I think, to know that there are women who are stuck in these situations, as you described, abusive relationships that they cannot get out of, with all these other things that they're trying to battle with. It's quite heartbreaking. And I guess that leads me to my next question. What changes do you see or hope to see come about on the back of this documentary?
Well, I think that question can be answered in so many different ways. I think where we are right now, we're in a moment of great opportunity. When I was making this film 2020 and 2020, 2021, 2022, we've seen some dark moments in our political history, the darkest that I've ever witnessed as a person living here and for 47 years. But now we have a great opportunity. We've been on an impact tour since January 2021. We've been into cinemas, into law firms, into educational settings, into parliament, into music festivals, into grassroots organisations. I've been into community centres. I've been speaking across the country about this story and about this film. And the sentiment and the heart on the ground is that people need change, and change is ahead. We've seen the resignation of Prime Minister Boris Johnson. He is going to leave soon, we hope. And I think there's change ahead with the new leader, potentially with a new party in the future. I think there's great opportunity now to overcome this hostile environment. I keep talking about how planting seeds at this moment in time creates opportunity in the future. I got to meet Rishi Sunak at 11 Downing Street on International Women's Day. And I was hesitant to speak to him because how do you just walk up to Rishi Sunak and talk about your film? But I had to dig deep and get that confidence to speak to him and say, I've made this film called Hostile. I'd like to send it to your office. And this film talks about the hostile environment. That conversation led to his office receiving a screening of the film. People did watch it. I didn't get a response, but I know the film was watched. Because of that, potentially, and the work that Marcus Rashford has been doing so incredibly well, and a lot of other organisations like JCWI, within his spring budget, he made people that had no recourse to public funds, gave them the opportunity to have free school meals. So that was a change in that policy and made it lenient and fairer for them. So we are seeing opportunity because of the people talking about this no recourse to public funds, raising awareness around hostile environment. So there have been thousands of stories and case studies like people, like Farouk, for example, and the hostility around him, that was a student one day, now he's now suffering from this limited leave to remain and trying to get his indefinite leave to remain, and Anthony Bryan, because of the Windrush scandal, still seeking compensation. We're hoping that these stories will create a greater level of empathy and policy change. So we're on tour, we're still out there. You know, you can find it on our website, hostiledocumentary.com, where to see the film. But I guess our goals right now are to have a full review of the no recourse to public fund policy, to ensure that the compensation scheme around the victims of the Windrush scandal sits outside the Home Office to keep it independent, to review the 10-year track of highly skilled migrants like Farouk there, so that these applications and visas become cheaper, and to review how students are subject to the hostile environment. They have a 20-hour work limit, they have restrictions on their visa. So that's fine in normal circumstances, but when a pandemic strikes, or when their parents lose their job at home, where they're forced into destitution, we need to review that. So we are asking for a review on certain conditions as filmmakers, and we're continuing to do that.
Amazing. So I get outside of that, so that's, you are kind of really driving that and then really getting that word out there. What's our role? And by our, I mean all of us who care about injustice and who know that things have to change. What do we need to be doing?
Well, I think in the first instance, what I would really ask everybody to do is to go on our website, hostiledocumentary.com, look at our impact page, and on there is a letter that you can print off and edit and send to your MP. The letter outlines the issues covered in the film, but also around no recourse to public funds and sort of championing, sort of changing that policy. So that would really help us. I think what I've witnessed this year is organisations coming together like Black Lives Matter, NHS fair pay protests, anti-demonstration protests, Kill the Bill, Stand Up to Racism, Extinction Rebellion, Green Party, Labour Party, Conservative Party. I've seen so many organisations coming together, and Black Lives Matter, at all of these different protests. And I think that energy is formulating and happening right now. So for you, public, to join those protests, to join those organisations, to look at what's happening in your local community, who's trying to help people suffering from this hostile environment, tap into that, join them, help them any way that you can. Keep that pressure on the government, keep that pressure on your local MP, speak about it at dinner, at events, within your network. Those small conversations lead to big things. And I think we're just trying to do that and sort of emphasize that when we're on tour, is to connect locally as much as possible within your own community. Thinking big sometimes is too big for us, but you live in communities, you have opportunity. In those communities, all of these organizations exist. Your MP exists. At a nuclear level, that's the first thing you can be doing, is contacting them. And I guess we saw that in Glasgow, where we have that at the end of our film, where Lakveer Singh and Sumik Segdev were saved by their Glaswegian community, because people stood up against that. They were like, no, we are not going to accept this. They came out in their thousands, on the street, and they stopped that deportation from happening. So be part of your local community. I find Nextdoor, Facebook, all of those different places, social media, it's great to connect. And you can hear things that are happening on the ground instantly. Be part of that action, because what this hostile environment does, it sets Black, Brown and Asian communities against each other. We need to change that language, formulate our plan together, because we are so similar in our struggle. We are so similar in our fight. We are so similar in that migrant story, because at one point, Yvonne, we were all poor in our history. We were all migrants in our history. And if we think about our ancestors, whether it's 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, 500 years, we were all migrants and working class. And if we focus on that, then we have a greater ability to fight this. And that's what we talk about, is focus on those similarities, set our differences aside and go and fight for those similarities together as communities. And so that's what we're doing. We're part of that. I'm even part of that myself, even outside this film. I'm part of that organizational community strategy and plan. And it's working in my area of Camden. It's working in Camden. It's working in Islington. It's working in London. And so, let's get it out there across the country. Let's do it together.
Yeah, I love that. And, and if it's working one place, it can work in another. And that's such a powerful thing you were saying about in the documentary, that whole, when the community got behind those two men in Glasgow, I mean, it filled my heart with hope, which I think is such an important thing, that there is hope when we come together. And like you said, put our differences aside and unite, all things are possible. I do truly believe that.
Absolutely.
So obviously for our listeners, where can they find out? I know you've dropped the website a couple of times. Where can listeners find out more information about viewings?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you follow us on social media at Hostile Doc, either on Instagram and Twitter. Again, my website is hostiledocumentary.com. The tickets are on there, the impact campaign's on there, information about the films on there. So you can see the film still. It will be available online soon, so watch out for those updates coming up. It's still in cinemas, and it's being sold in Europe right now. We're looking at selling it in the UK with a broadcaster. So yeah, all of the information is on the website. I really encourage you to come to the cinema to see the film, because it's a different experience when you're in the cinema on the big screen. There's a Q&A, there's a panel, sometimes there's food, and people get to meet, and I love that. So we've had some good news the last 24 hours with a big organization that's going to support our impact tour. So I think Hostile is going to be really out there for the next 3 to 6 months on the road. So just look at our website and keep looking out for those updates on social media.
Brilliant. Well, that's fantastic news, Sonita, and I'm really pleased to hear that. I can't stress enough to the listeners that this is something you want to go and see and find out about and listen to. It is eye-opening, eye-watering, but it also then drives you, as Sonita said, to take action, to understand that we all have a role to play. This is not a moment to sit back and hope somebody else does something. We all need to get involved and get behind this. Sonita, what can I say? Thank you so much for giving the time to come on the Women's Power Hour show to talk about Hostile, to share about your own story, and to really kind of wake us up to this, to what is happening, and to drive us to get involved. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Yvonne, and thank you for listening in.